In the shadows of grand palaces, among the glittering domes of Istanbul, and behind the gilded gates of harems and barracks, a hidden world once thrived, one filled with secrets, survival, ambition, and unfreedom. This is the story of the white slaves of the Ottoman Empire, a tale not often told, sometimes romanticized, often misunderstood, and yet deeply rooted in the empire's rise and rule. Welcome to History and Curiosities. Today, we dive into the rarely explored lives of white slaves in the Ottoman world, from Balkan villages to the Sultan's court. At its peak, the Ottoman Empire spanned more than 2 million square kilometers. It lasted over 600 years, bridging the East and West, from the Balkans and the Caucasus to Arabia and North Africa. Its capital, Constantinople, renamed Istanbul after the conquest in 1453, was a multicultural melting pot. But beneath the surface of this impressive empire was a system that relied heavily on human bondage. Unlike the transatlantic slave trade, which transported millions of African slaves to the Americas, the Ottoman slave system operated differently. Here, the face of slavery was not always black. In fact, some of the most valued and visible slaves were white, European boys and girls, often Christians, taken from villages during brutal raids or bartered into bondage by desperate families. While the term white slavery today conjures up certain modern associations, within the Ottoman context it referred to a structured, institutional system that governed the lives of tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of people over centuries. How did white Christians become slaves in a Muslim empire? There were several main routes. One of the most notorious was through the devshirme system, or blood tax, where Christian boys in the Balkans were periodically rounded up by Ottoman officials. Families were forced to surrender their sons, typically aged 8 to 14. These children were taken from their homes, converted to Islam, and trained for military or administrative service. While devastating for many, it was also, paradoxically, a path to immense power. Others were captured during military campaigns. The Ottomans waged wars across Hungary, Serbia, Romania, and parts of Ukraine, and victory often meant looting not just gold and land, but people. Slaves were considered spoils of war, a practice accepted under Islamic jurisprudence at the time. And then there were the Barbary pirates, feared corsairs from North Africa, who terrorized European coastal towns from Italy to Ireland. Operating largely autonomously, they captured thousands, possibly over 1 million, Europeans between the 16th and 19th centuries. Men, women, and children were seized, then sold in slave markets stretching from Algiers to Istanbul. Istanbul, the heart of the Ottoman world, was not only a political and cultural hub, but also a key destination for slaves. It's estimated that in certain periods, 1 in 5 residents of the city was a slave. They weren't just confined to menial labor. They were cooks, scribes, entertainers, concubines, eunuchs, soldiers, and advisors. The Ottoman system, unlike Western chattel slavery, allowed a measure of social mobility. Slaves could, and often did, rise through the ranks, sometimes surpassing freeborn citizens in influence. Take, for example, the Janissaries, the empire's elite infantry corps. These were devshirme boys, kidnapped, converted, and indoctrinated. Their training was rigorous, physically punishing, spiritually immersive, and mentally reshaping. In exchange, they received salaries, uniforms, and the status of being among the empire's most feared warriors. Many became governors, generals, even grand viziers, the empire's highest office beneath the Sultan. It's a disturbing irony. The very act of enslavement sometimes unlocked doors to privilege and power that would have otherwise been unthinkable in their native villages. Much of the mystique around white slavery in the Ottoman Empire centers on the imperial harem, that elusive, opulent wing of the Topkapi Palace, closed off to all but the Sultan, his family, and the women who served him. Contrary to Hollywood fantasies, the harem wasn't a den of constant debauchery. It was a politically charged space. Many women in the harem were European, from Italy, Circassia, Georgia, Ukraine. Some were kidnapped. Others were sold by their families in the hope that they might rise in fortune. Indeed, some did. One of the most famous examples is Roxolana, also known as Hurrem Sultan. She began her life as a Ukrainian Christian slave girl, but eventually became the legal wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a shocking breach of custom, and one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Women in the harem received education, training in etiquette, and artistic instruction. Their roles were not merely sexual. They managed the palace, influenced politics through intrigue, and advised their sons, future sultans, in matters of governance. But many others weren't so lucky. Concubines who didn't rise in status were subject to strict rules, surveillance by eunuchs, and the constant threat of being cast aside, or worse. Ottoman society was intensely hierarchical, and so was slavery. Your race, gender, age, beauty, health, and skills determined your fate. European or Circassian women, prized for their light skin and features, fetched the highest prices. Black Africans, often brought through Saharan routes, were mostly assigned to domestic and manual labor, often as eunuchs or field workers. Men from the Caucasus or Balkans might become soldiers or administrators. The value wasn't only physical, it was also cultural. Slaves who could speak multiple languages, read Arabic or Persian, or possessed musical or medical skills were significantly more valued. And yet, even among slaves, status could be fluid. Many were manumitted after years of service. Islamic law encouraged freeing slaves as an act of piety. It wasn't unusual for a loyal servant to be freed upon their master's death or as part of a religious vow. Freed slaves, known as azad, often stayed within the orbit of their former masters. They might become clients, associates, even partners in business. Others entered professions like medicine, teaching, or trade. Ottoman court records show that some former slaves even owned slaves themselves, a stark reminder of how normalized and entrenched the institution was. Slavery in the Ottoman Empire had a deeply sexualized component. Both boys and girls were trafficked for carnal purposes, not only in the harem but in private homes, bathhouses, and brothels. This wasn't always considered scandalous by contemporaries. In some cases, it was almost transactional. Impoverished families sold their daughters not only for economic survival, but with the hope of their eventual ascension in society. Some women wielded real power and influence, but at the cost of their freedom and bodily autonomy. Boy slaves were also sexually exploited, especially in bathhouses, where they were hired out for massage and companionship, often euphemisms for more illicit activities. Though same-sex relations were condemned under Islamic law, the reality was far more complex. Social norms often turned a blind eye when power, wealth, and silence were maintained. It's a haunting legacy, a system where sexuality was both currency and curse, where physical beauty became both a ticket to influence and a prison of constant performance. What makes Ottoman slavery particularly fascinating and troubling is the way it straddled contrasts. It wasn't based on race alone. It allowed mobility but operated through brutal extraction. It offered cultural assimilation, but only through total submission. Many European travelers who visited the empire in the 17th and 18th centuries recorded their astonishment at the presence of white slaves in high positions. Yet they often misunderstood the system, filtering it through their own biases and Christian moral frameworks. Western observers viewed all slavery through the lens of sin and degradation, but the Ottomans saw it differently. For them, it was a functional, regulated part of society, endorsed, albeit conditionally, by religion. That said, not all Muslims agreed with the system. Reformers, especially in the 19th century, began pushing back. Influenced by Western abolitionist movements and Islamic reform, the Ottoman government made several attempts to ban the slave trade. But enforcement was weak and demand remained high, particularly in elite circles. By the time slavery was formally abolished in the empire in the late 19th century, the damage had been done. Generations of people, from Christian boys turned soldiers to concubines turned queens, had passed through the system, each leaving behind echoes of a complex and often painful legacy. Slavery in the Ottoman Empire doesn't fit neatly into modern moral boxes. It was exploitative, yet sometimes empowering. It was brutal, yet paradoxically redemptive for a few. It was religiously sanctioned, yet often bent for convenience. What remains clear is this: the white slaves of the Ottoman Empire were not passive victims. but people caught in the web of history, sometimes broken by it, sometimes rising through it, always shaped by forces far beyond their control. History is messy. It's complicated. But if we want to understand ourselves, we must understand the world that came before us, even its darkest corners. Thanks for watching History and Curiosities. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories that challenge what you think you know about the past.